everyone, and welcome to Trauma-Informed Meetings, the third in our Trauma-Informed Training series with Addie Peters. Due to technical difficulties, we are recording this webinar in the series for you to watch on your own time. And Addie will still share all of the information that she would have shared in the live webinar with you, and we're sorry that that was unable to happen. So now I will turn it over to Addie to get us started.
Great, thank you very much, Eliza. One moment here, we'll just share the. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much, Eliza. And so as Eliza said, what we're going to be talking about today, the first day of the year, the December 22nd, that the days are getting longer and brighter again. That's where we're coming to you from this morning. We're going to talk about bringing trauma-informed practices to life in meetings. So infusing meetings that we have in work with trauma-informed principles and practices. So take two on this one. And thank you guys for being with us. I'm going to make the assumption as we go through this that meetings are a part of life. Meetings are a part of work life and organizational life. And so how can we infuse these trauma-informed practices into the meetings that we have? What we'll do today is we'll spend a little bit of time talking and thinking about why trauma-informed meetings are a good place to start and something worth considering for your organization or for your group. And then a little bit of time as well on the technicalities on some of the hows of trauma-informed meetings. I want to take you through some examples from trauma-informed organizational models of how the principles can be infused into these trauma-informed meetings. We will spend then just a little bit of time thinking about what are some special considerations when we think about the pandemic, when we think about having virtual meetings, and then there'll be some resources that I'll just flag for you, guide you through briefly, and then resource links will follow this webinar as well. And those of you who've signed up for it already will be able to get those resource links from the Children's Trust or from Eliza. And then if you're watching this as a recording or watching this later, you can get in touch as well and we'll be able to get those resource links to you. So I'm going to begin by inviting you to pause for a few moments and reflect. And the question is, how would you know if a meeting with your group or with your workplace was a trauma-informed meeting? Or what might look different? What might sound different? What might feel different? So what I'd invite you to do here as you're watching the recording is just press pause on the recording for a couple of minutes and jot down those thoughts. Okay, so welcome back. And I'm not sure what in your workplace might look different if meetings became more trauma-informed, infused with the principles that we look like in a moment, where of safety and trustworthiness, of being equity-centered, of there being inclusiveness and cultural humility, of empowerment and inclusivity. So with some of those things, what might look different? And when I think about this, or and for having had experiences in organizations of going through a shift from meetings that very much were not trauma-informed to meetings that became that way over time with a lot of work and a lot of repetition, I think one thing I would notice differently walking into a room where a meeting was trauma-informed is just how people would look physically. You would see more open faces. You would see people more oriented towards each other. I believe that you'd see or experience or feel a lightness in the room, even in the face of heavy material, a lightness as people come together and trust the process that's going to happen. I believe that you would hear more voices in a room. I believe that the tone of the voices would be gentler, would be softer. And I really think, and I have experienced, this is kind of the sell for making the effort for trauma-informed meetings, that whereas previously people might come dragging their feet to meetings, or meetings might be a source of fear or even dread, or maybe just apathy. That people are coming to meetings full of curiosity, a desire to share, a desire to learn, and really to coming to meetings with hope that something will come out of this process. And so that's what I think can look different when the culture of meetings change. And so for all of you, may be different points along that journey, but it's certainly worth persevering. Perspectives then that we want to take as we discuss bringing trauma-informed practices to life in meetings. We certainly want to think about what are the trauma-informed principles that we're talking about. And I am borrowing here from the established sort of SAMHSA trauma-informed principles, and you of course can expand from this or think about your own values, or the culture of your organization, or principles that are aligned with these. But we're talking about taking the perspective of looking at embedding or infusing the principles of safety, trust and transparency, collaboration, empowerment, peer support, cultural humility, and equity into the meetings that we have. So we want to be thinking all the time as we're making shifts in our meeting. Do they embrace these principles? Are they aligned with these principles? And what sort of impact might they have? I always like to take the perspective as well in any sort of intentional change that we might be making in our personal practices or in our workplaces from a trauma-informed perspective, that we want to make sure above and beyond anything else that we are avoiding re-traumatization. And I do sincerely believe, and again invite you to sort of reflect back on your own experiences, but I do believe that workplace meetings can be, and probably have been for many, many people, the source of great anxiety, unsafety, a feeling of lack of powerlessness, a feeling of very limited choice, very limited control. So really a feeling of being traumatized again for people. And really what, at a fundamental level, what we want to ensure in our workplace meetings is that we're avoiding re-traumatization of people. Okay, and this might be happening unintentionally, but we step and think, gosh, why are we bringing people together? And certainly, and for many of you in the work that you're doing, it's healing work, and it's educational work, and it's advocacy work. And so the idea in bringing our staff, or our volunteers, or our leaders together should be above and beyond anything else to avoid re-traumatization. Another way then to sort of think about this is that in a meeting, when we're gathering together, it's a great opportunity to flip the script on a trauma experience, or to flip the script sometimes on the way things have always been done. And the way that things have always been done is not always, or has not always been, right, in our dominant culture, has not always been equity centered, has not always been very culturally aware, or the practice of cultural humility has not always been very informed by stress and trauma and toxic load and secondary trauma and all of those things. And so we want to take the opportunity to really flip that, to turn that upside down in a meeting. We think about some of the things that are fundamental to the experience of trauma. Those things are, for example, a feeling of powerlessness, a lack of choice and control, an invalidation of feelings, a betrayal of trust, and so on and so on. And so there is a tremendous opportunity and obligation on us to flip that script and to turn that upside down in a workplace meeting when our desire is to infuse trauma-informed principles in our culture. And so we create meetings where people are coming feeling, oh, I have voice in this meeting, I have some choice and control. There's going to be some democracy and shared decision making in this meeting. I can trust the process that's going to happen. This is not an unpredictable situation for me. There's more predictability here in my workplace. So there's lots of ways that we can really create that opposite experience to trauma in a meeting. One of the other reasons that looking at workplace meetings as a way to create some culture shift, to have some impact and some influence as they relate to trauma-informed change, is just thinking about the concept or the idea of leverage. And thinking about leverage is, it's the ability to influence a system, and so a workplace system, and in a way that's likely to multiply your efforts or to have a cascading effect. And this is why meetings, as opposed to, for example, perhaps policy and procedure change, or one-shot trainings, or leadership going through a course, but frontline staff not having that opportunity, is that really meetings can have that cascading effect. Pretty much everybody in an organization attends meetings. There's sort of cross population as well of who goes to which meetings. Meetings tend to repeat. So if you don't get something right the first time, it can be practiced again and again and again. So there's dose after dose after dose, right? We talk a lot in my background is primarily in behavioral health, and so we talk a lot there about people get hurt in relationships, so they heal in relationships. And so this certainly applies at a clinical and an individual level, but also at an organizational level. People have been sort of battered by the systems that we've created, and the meeting structures that we have, and sort of the power over, and the sort of the leader in at the top of the boardroom table, and everybody sitting there nodding their heads and feeling that they have to say yes to save their jobs. And that's an extreme example, but that has hurt people, that has hurt organizations, that has created distrust and a lack of safety. So really, in order to shift and change that, we want to do it in these same spaces, in these same meetings. We need to do it again and again and again, dose after dose after dose. And this is why meetings are such a wonderful opportunity to do that, because for better or worse, we are for the foreseeable future, in the ways we organize our workplace, is going to meet again and again and again. Now, meetings, of course, should always have purpose and intention, and with time, that's part of the trauma-informed principles as well. Really honoring people's time. Trust builds up through knowing why we're meeting, and so those things will happen too. I really think as well about meetings and leverage and culture shift, all of these things coming together. And it's not about one sort of swift, sharp turn saying, okay, we're going to, we've found this worksheet on trauma-informed meetings, and we're going to change our meetings, and we're going to do steps 1, 2, 3 from our resource list next week, and then our meetings will change. It absolutely takes time. I was thinking this morning about maybe because it's just coming up to Christmas time here, and we keep hearing about the supply chain issues and all of that, and it's reminding me of, I don't know quite how long ago it was, but when the Evergreen got stuck in the Panama Canal, right? And it's not just one great big. Maybe it was for that ship, I don't know, but we think about these big. It's just this series of small maneuvers, right? That's going to set the ship on course and change things. But when it happens, it really is magic. And I've experienced that with trauma-informed meetings. I've experienced the hard work, the slog of going through and making those changes and discussing, really the minutiae of, should our chairs be faced this way? Should our chairs be faced that way? Is it okay to have a table sort of in the middle between us? Or should we have more open physical space? Are we allowed to have our phones on? Should we not have our phones on? What do we do if people come into the meeting? Like, all of this stuff really, really discussed, and you can just feel that you are stuck down in the weeds. But when there is a shift, you really feel it. You feel that lightness, and you feel that change, and suddenly things start to look and to feel very, very different. Which is why I asked you early on to sort of reflect on what might look and feel different for you, because that can help us to get there, to keep that in mind. So I want to look at a couple of models of trauma-informed practices and trauma-informed organizational development, and look at some of the ways that they have embedded trauma-informed principles in meetings. And so the one I'm going to start with is the sanctuary model of trauma-informed care and trauma-informed organizational development. And this is a model that I'm very familiar with. I worked for many years at AK Child and Family, which became the first organization in Alaska to be certified in the sanctuary model of trauma-informed care. And over a period of, really this took many years, we began with instituting a change in our organizational meetings. And one of those was to begin, this is a way to begin every meeting, to begin all our workplace meetings. We began all our meetings that had 3 people or more with a community meeting. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit through this and through the rationale for it. And that's not to say that this is exactly the type of language or the type of practice that you might want to introduce in your own meeting, but it sort of explains the reasoning behind it, and then I'll talk through a little bit some of my experiences with it too. So in a sanctuary model community meetings, all meetings are started by asking 3 questions. They are, how are you feeling? What's your goal for the meeting? And who can you ask for help? And then this part of the meeting ends with a hopeful or positive thought, quote, or intention. And so in asking the question, how are you feeling? And the way this is done in a sanctuary meeting, in a sanctuary community meeting, everybody does sit in a circle as best as is able to be achieved within the physical, space that people have. And, virtually it should be done in a different way. And so you turn to the person to your left or your right, or you can go across the room. There's lots of variation there. But you start off by asking that person in a genuine way how they are feeling. So that's how a meeting would begin. And so think back to the perspective of flipping the script on trauma. And unfortunately, in the line of work that I do, and I suspect most of you do, when we talk about trauma, we are most often talking about betrayal trauma. We are most often talking about people who have been hurt and who have been abused and who have been neglected and have been let down within relationships. And when that happens, we're talking about people whose feelings really have not mattered. Somebody who's feeling and who's also have perhaps learned to distrust their own feelings as a means of self-protection. And if we're doing individual work with people, we talk about starting off with understanding feelings and emotional literacy and all of these things. And really, we have to be able to, to walk the walk as well, and to practice what we preach. And so by genuinely asking our colleagues and our supervisors and our fellow workers or volunteers that genuine question, how are you feeling? We're really changing that trauma experience. We're saying, how you feel matters, your full humanness matters, how it is you're showing up to this meeting matters, whether you're tired or you're energized or you're excited or you're curious or you're angry or you're bored. These things have meaning and your feelings have value. So there's so much that's embedded in this question. And so that's why the meeting starts this way, with asking that question, how are you feeling? The next, I put this in here as well. It's kind of a preamble to the talking about doing things virtually as well. Sometimes we need to shift things up. But even without that, being asked, so I have to say, because being asked how you're feeling in a workplace meeting, right, flat out can feel weird, particularly if you're not used to it, right? If this is new, if this is a real big perspective shift, and sometimes it is, other than how you feel, oh, good, great, grand, how are you, right? But the real, no, how are you feeling? And so with the, again, we have meetings over and over and over again. So there's lots of opportunity to process and to do things differently. And so you might want to mix it up. Sometimes when I was practicing these on a daily basis, sometimes we'd ask how are you feeling on a scale from 1 to 10, or if your feeling was a weather pattern, how might it be, or if your feeling was a color, what color are you feeling today? So, and again, these ways are a little bit psychologically safer than just the bald or the bare, how are you feeling? That can be quite difficult for people to answer. And so there's other sort of fun ways to do it. So on this squirrel scale, how do you feel today, for example? Because we want to think about ways to make it right. The principle of safety and psychological safety. How do we help people feel more safe? And just a note, as I do talk about this, I think it's really important. And again, this is something that you might want to do some reflection on or have some discussion on in your own organization. There's a big difference between feeling and being safe and feeling and being comfortable. And I think where we decide that distinction is going to be different for every individual and every organization. But there's lots of times I have to push myself outside my comfort zone to learn and to grow and to change. Even, for example, right now, recording a webinar, it's my first time to do that. I feel a lot safer if I have an audience to speak to. But that's outside of a comfort zone. A safety is something very different. And I think sometimes we confuse them. And so, how do you feel? Oh, I don't feel safe answering that question. That might be legitimate. There might be reasons in your workplace where the trust and psychological safety doesn't exist yet for that to happen. But sometimes it's just a comfort thing too. And so how do we distinguish between moving outside of a comfort zone, which is a good idea, and moving outside of a safety zone? So that's something to kind of take away and reflect on. But it is certainly aligned with trauma-informed principles. So to get to a way where routinely in our workplace, we are honoring each other's full humanity and asking the question, how do you feel today? And saying, people's feelings matter, staff's feelings matter. The next question that we ask of our partners, goes around the circle is, what is your goal for the meeting? Again, this is actually a great sort of business idea as well. It gets to the intention of the meeting, and if we end up finding out that everybody's goal for the meeting is just to get out of there in 20 minutes so they can get on with their important business for the day, that's valuable information, and let's use it and reassess the purpose of meetings with trust and transparency as a principle. We want to trust that meetings will be important and meaningful and a valuable use of our time and talent and resources. But sort of another trauma-informed perspective and reason that we ask this question, what is your goal for the meeting, is another thing about the trauma experience is that it can really make people be and feel stuck in a moment in time, stuck like, the proverbial broken record. It can make people feel that things are always going to be the same, things are always going to be bad. There is not a positive and a hopeful future out there. We know that people who, if we think about a lot of trauma piled on top of a person, sort of the sense of a brighter future might not be there. Goal setting and being future oriented is often hampered when there's a lot of trauma in a person's history. And so this is a way that, again, day after day after day after day, we can nudge other people and ourselves and each other to being future oriented, future directed, and setting goals. And these goals don't need to be huge. The goal for the meeting may be, oh, I want to check in with Eliza to make sure, all the logs get done today. Or my goal for the meeting is, to have this question answered, or to know what time, dinner on our residential unit is tonight. Or so we're not looking for, giant overarching goals, but this is what I want to achieve, or I want to get done in this meeting. And so this having that future orientation and the ability to say, here's a goal that I have, again, is a wonderful way to sort of flip that script on trauma, where you can really get stuck at a moment in time. The third question then is, who can you ask for help? And in my experience, this has been the most difficult question for people to answer within a community meeting. Particularly, I think for those of us working in these fields, our tendency is often to be the helper as opposed to being the one who's asking for help. And again, if we think about that, taking the trauma-informed perspective and flipping the script, with a trauma experience, people have often felt powerlessness, helplessness, have either not reached out, been in a position to reach out for help, or have reached out for help and have not, that help has not always come. And so again, we want to create this experience of, if you ask for help, then it's okay to ask for help, it's safe to ask for help, and that help will come. And a lot of times, again, in my experience, when we practice, a lot of times people's goals for meetings, and that's might be to stay present and attentive in a meeting, which is a very appropriate goal for a workplace meeting. And anybody who's sat in meetings know that you often have, many people who are not present and attentive. So it can be, can be a great goal, or the goal can be to listen, or the goal can be to, to participate in the discussion. And so a lot of times when, this question would come up, who can you ask for help? It'd be, I'm going to ask the person beside me to, to nudge me if I start to nod off, or if I kind of keep checking my phone. So it's those kind of little things, but it's practicing this idea of, yeah, I'm going to ask my colleague. We're going to, build up this collaboration and mutuality and peer support. I'm going to ask this person to help me. Or your goal might be to remember something that has to happen later in the day, and you're going to ask this person for a reminder. So it's those kind of things, but it's building the muscle and building the habit of, we are in this together, and it's okay to ask for help. The very important piece of this as well is if I say, okay, who can I ask for help? And I say, I'm going to ask Eliza for help. And it can feel a little stilted, but what happens then is that the person who is asked for help then can say, yep, I'll help you. Or they might say, I'd love to help you, but actually I have too much on my plate today and I'm not going to be able to follow through. And then every time I've seen it, somebody else steps up and say, oh, I can do that. And it's a wonderful sort of example of that loop being closed, of seeing somebody ask for help, somebody acknowledge that they will help, or that they're overloaded, not in a position to do it, and then somebody else step in. And so this one little question I have seen, right, over time, it really, really shifts the culture in an organization to make it okay to ask for help, and to really hold people accountable as well and to their word. And because when you say, yeah, I'll help you, or I'll check in with you later, or I'll take that role on, it's the follow through becomes really, really important, and builds that trust and transparency in an organization. But it takes time. And I can tell you, for me, speaking personally, probably, for the first 5-6 months of having these meetings, I probably went through the motions and, asked for help, maybe with somebody reminding me of something or helping me stay on track. And it was probably, 6 or 7 months into the process where actually I had a really busy day. And for the first time I thought, no, I'm going to genuinely ask for help from somebody in this meeting. And it was a powerful personal experience to ask for that. And for the person to say, yep, I've got the time and I will help you with that. So we can change things with these kind of practices and questions, but it absolutely takes time and effort, and it takes going through the motions, when kind of holding faith when you're not sure if it's really going to take. And everybody, right? You're bringing a lot of individuals together in a meeting, so everybody's going to be at a different point with this, with where they trust the process and on their own journey. So. But we do it again and again and again, and with time it changes. Then we end the community meeting with a positive thought. And again, this can go many different ways. Sometimes people come prepared with a little quote for the day, or today is the first day after solstice. The positive thought might be, and everyone just, our days are getting longer, or things are getting brighter. And again, this is another way to sort of to flip that script on trauma, where there's a lot of darkness, a lot of hopelessness. And so we just want to sort of create possibility and hope and reorient us. This is where we're reorienting to the business part of the meeting. We kind of want to have this sense of hopefulness and of future. This community meeting, again, it's going to depend on the number of people that you have in your workplace. And At the beginning, it can take a long time, but typically if you had 10 people, you go through these questions in less than 10 minutes, probably in about six to 7 minutes, as people become practiced in it. But going through it quickly, that it doesn't become any less meaningful. So you can, if you want to sort of look up the sanctuary model of care, you can find out a lot more about this. And of course, lots of questions come up. But if you ask somebody how they're feeling, and they're feeling, you know, not just maybe feeling a little tired or upset, but, you know, very angry or very scared or very sad, what's sort of the process for that then within a meeting, when really what we're here to do is discuss, you know, the strategic plan for the year. And all of all of that is built in, and usually what happens is somebody, you know, volunteers to check in with that person after the meeting, or to step outside the meeting if that's what's appropriate. And it's not, these are not about therapy sessions or letting, you know, any person's feelings overtake a meeting, but if that's in the room, we want to acknowledge it. And so there's lots of processes built in to do that. So that's one example. Encourage you to check it out. I found it a lot of work, but well worth it in the end. And there does have to be that little bit of a leap of faith. And to show you another example, and this comes from the ARC model. The ARC stands for Attachment, Regulation, and Competency. And so the ARC model, again, just like the sanctuary model originally, was a clinical or a treatment model of trauma-informed care, and has since expanded as we understand, you know, we've got to not just be doing these things at an individual student or patient or client level. We need to be doing these things at an organizational level, because we're all human. So the ARC model, Attachment, Regulation, and Competency, is expanded as well into practices that can be infused throughout a whole organization. And again, this is just a way to start a meeting, or to do an opening check-in. So I'll just talk you through that briefly. Again, you can think about other things that might be suitable to your culture here. And this is more about, as we come together as people, we want to make sure that we're present and regulated in a room. And it really focuses on the honoring of people's feelings, and the recognizing the sort of primary importance of establishing that sort of psychological safety, emotional safety before we begin content or topic or meetings. And so there's a check-in process. And the check-in process begins by asking people to rate their energy levels. It moves on then to asking people to think about how comfortable that energy feels in their bodies. And then to thinking about the task at hand, or the meeting at hand, or the training at hand, or whatever the case may be, and just thinking about, is there a good match between their energy levels and what's going to be required of them in the next period of time. And then to sort of bring all of that together, and to think about, if there's a good match, that's fantastic, and actually there's great power in having done that check-in and check-in with your body. Just even the checking in can help us feel grounded and present and ready for the meeting, and ready to attend to our colleagues and sit down and do the, you know, the hard work or the hashing out of whatever business decisions need to be made. But then it invites, you know, it recognizes people's full humanity, which is of course very trauma-informed principle. And this is okay if we're, you know, if you're not quite where you need to be for this meeting, how can you get there? And we sort of could talk about regulation practices like stretching, breathing, ranting, grabbing a drink, jotting down worries, these kind of things. So that's another example from the ARC, the ARC model, of a way to start a meeting. And again, we can, just like with kids, you know, we really know the value of repetition, predictability, patterns, etc. There's the very same applies to us. And so if we're going to a workplace meeting, and over time we know, oh, this is the way that it's going to start, and this is the way I'm going to be grounded and oriented to my colleagues and to the materials, to what it is that we have to do over time. Again, that's really going to create great safety for us as humans, and really make meetings be more productive in the long run, and lead to some true collaboration and decision making that's meaningful. Kind of going back again to the considerations. What are the broad considerations when we want to infuse trauma-informed principles in our meetings and really have an impact on organizational culture? We want to always be thinking about safety. I'd say we want to attend to physical safety in meeting rooms. We want to be thinking about, right, when we're meeting in this space, are we creating a space where people are going to be tripping up over wires, or maybe feel that that they don't have an exit from the meeting, that they're too far away from the exit? How does that make people feel? How safe is that? But really thinking more and more about social, psychological, and emotional safety in meeting settings, and being very honest. If you have a role in setting meetings and leading meetings, be very honest about how anxiety provoking meetings can be for people, and just really there's lots of ideas out there, but we want to, and guidelines, but it's really about starting with thinking about, gosh, how safe do people feel? And what about when we go around, do a round robin and we call on people? How does that feel for everybody? How does that feel for people who might have less power than me in an organization? How does that feel for people who are more introverted? Is somebody really able to listen to what their colleagues are sharing if they're getting anxious about what they themselves have, are going to be asked to share in 2 minutes or in 10 minutes? How are we establishing safety within a meeting? And so really thinking that through from the perspective of everybody within the meeting. We want to think more and more about choice and control within meetings. Again, every time I see these words, I see the words choice and control, I think about how abuse and trauma and systemic racism and discrimination and historical abuses child abuse take choice and control away from people. And so how do we make sure, right? How do we avoid re-traumatizing? How do we make sure in meetings that we have, in calling our staff together, that we do not strip people of choice and control? So how do we infuse more and more and more choice and control in meetings and still get work done? These are really questions to grapple with. There's guidelines out there, but I think we've got to first step back and really think about it from the perspective of your own workplace. How do we ensure emotional and physical regulation in meetings? So there was a good example there from the ARC model, doing those check-ins early on. And how do we use meetings, use this coming together again and again and again? How do we use that to build up trust in our workplace? And how do we use that to make sure that we are doing things transparently and being upfront and honest as colleagues? So I'm going to link you to some resources here shortly, and there'll be lots of very specific ideas in the resources and sort of into action ideas, or you can look at the sanctuary community meetings, read a little bit more on that and see if that's something you'd like to test and try out, or you can look at the ARC opening rituals and see if that's something that you'd like to try out. And then here's another few into action ideas, but really it's about thinking about the principles and how do you align them for you and your workplace. One thing I would say is absolutely, I can't see why there's why there would be a situation where this wouldn't be appropriate, is really to establish a practice of sending meeting agendas out in advance. Okay, we think about that builds transparency, it builds predictability, it builds trust, it helps people to come to a meeting prepared, right? That's another thing about trauma. Even when we have repeated trauma or there's abuse within a household, a lot of it's about, it's coming, but you don't know when it's going to come, and you don't know how it's going to present, and you don't know what space you're going to be in when this stuff gets thrown at you, right? Or even, a natural disaster, these kind, you know them, you can brace for them coming, but you don't know how or when. And I think it can feel like that in a workplace meeting. Oh my God, I know someone's going to bring up this report I haven't got done, or but I don't know how or when or why, or is it going to be at the beginning of the agenda? Right? Sending out an agenda to people it's respectful, it creates predictability, it helps people to prepare, it builds trust. There's so much. It is honoring of people in a workplace, and it should be a lot more basic than it is. So I would say really think about sending out meeting agendas in advance. Then what else is very important from a trauma-informed perspective? We think about power, and we think about collaboration, and right, if people are being asked to come to a meeting, right? So you want to think about who should be in the meeting. If people are being asked to be in a meeting, it's because, and should be because, they have something to contribute, right? It's not, a meeting shouldn't just be about there's information to pass along to you. If it's just information to pass along, it can typically be passed along in an email or a memo. So it's that somebody has something to contribute. So let's start with honoring that person's potential contribution by and with leveling power differences. It doesn't mean we don't have supervisors and supervisees and organizational structures and hierarchies, but as much as possible, right, we do want to not have this sort of, you know, I've got the power and, you know, and you don't. So broad and inclusive invitations to submit additional agenda items. Okay, so this is, you know, here's 3 things that are on the agenda. Does anybody have agenda items to add? Please include them here. And again, we really want to think about, and it will depend on your workplace and the number of people and sort of the culture that you already have, but how do you invite people to submit agenda items? You know, and if you only do it in one way, that may not be enough. That may not be enough to ensure that people feel safe to submit agenda items. Just, oh, send an email back. Right? It may be, if there's a very hierarchical sort of power down structure, someone might feel, oh, you know, I know it said we could submit agenda items but you know, I'm not sure how genuine that was. Now, sometimes that takes time, right? So that's what any of these things, just like I had shared, that for me to genuinely ask for help in a sanctuary community meeting took months. It may be the same with an invitation to submit agenda items. If that has never happened before, right, if the agenda is always set by the chairperson or the CEO or the group leader, and now you're getting a new email that says, if you have additional agenda items, please, it may feel, I'm not kidding you, some people say, that's a trap, or I'm not submitting an agenda item, or if I submit an agenda item, that just makes the meeting go longer, and all my colleagues will be, you know, shooting daggers at me, and, you know, so, and that's know that can happen. And it might take 3 months of please submit additional agenda items until somebody does it. And they'll say, oh, that person did it and it seemed to go fine. And then maybe a month later, somebody else will do it. But I do think we also want to think about, as opposed is maybe there's individual meetings happening between a supervisor and a supervisee saying, oh, you know, we have that big group meeting next week. I wanted to know, is there anything that you'd like to, you know, add onto that agenda? So what are the, you know, the reach out ways as well, so that we invite people in more than one way to submit to the agenda. So to think about an invitation to be broad and to be inclusive has to go. We have to think about many different ways of communicating that, and not just doing it in one way. Small changes as well, small shifts in culture and in how we conduct and comport ourselves and how we do business can make a big difference. So just one example of this, I think, is in any, you know, many times you go to meetings, or particularly to trainings, it seems like too, or if you're getting together with a group of people that you don't typically get together with, there's often a discussion of ground rules, right? Oh, so what are our ground rules? And again, I believe, and I try to practice, not all the time, but I say, instead of talking about ground rules, maybe talking about agreements. What are some group agreements? What are some ways that we can agree to be together? What are sometimes we'll see what are the norms or what are the expectations, and moving away from that sort of power over hierarchical language of what are our rules to what might be our agreements is one of those small changes or little shifts that can lead to more, and that can help people feel that this meeting is more inclusive, that this is more about them, and that can shift things to a more fully human, more equity-centered, more culturally appropriate meeting than the sort of top-down model. If you are going to make, or you are part of a team that's sort of thinking about shifting the way that you do meetings or making changes, it's really important. It's really honoring of people, and it's, you know, to be in line with trauma-informed principles. We need to be, it can't be a sneak attack, right? You need to be explicit about the changes that you may be making or inviting people to make along with you, and what the intended impact of those changes is, including people will want to know, right? They don't want to spend 6 or 7 minutes or 16 or 17 minutes on a sanctuary community meeting if they're there to, you know, to get their budget signed off on. So what is the intended impact? And there should be clear that there's a business, so the bottom line business impact will be positive too, and it will with time. You be honest about time first with your, with yourself if you're leading this in any way, and then whatever this really takes time. We are going to try this out, we're going to test it out. It will take time, but the intended impact is that, that with time people will be coming to meetings and they're going to look different. People's faces are going to be brighter. People are going to be coming with hopefulness. People are going to trust they can actually bring their thorniest sort of issues and problems that we want to work through, and we will end up with a healthier culture and with better business practices and decisions. You do want to be explicit. This is not about trying to sneak it on anyone. Be explicit about some of these ways that we're going to change things. Might feel scary, might feel icky, might feel weird, because it's not. It's a change. It's a break from the way things have always been done. And honestly, just being honest about it feeling a little bit awkward can help it feel less so. I would suggest that you want to select and try out a structure, a model, or a guide. So you could look at one of the two things that I offered. There's going to be resources at the end of this. Again, from any of the resources, you can pull something and say, oh, let's try this out in our organization. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, but you will want to, whatever you try out, you will want to adjust it so that it aligns with your culture, so that it fits the humans that you are working with. And so do make adjustments, but I think it's not about trying one thing one week and another thing the next week and another thing the next week. And there is the need for a little bit of repetition. And to really give it time and to trust the process. I think as well that considering having rotating chairs or co-chairs in a committee meeting or other meetings is a really good idea from a trauma-informed perspective, so that we are embracing principles specifically of collaboration, peer support, mutuality, sort of the leveling of power differences. So not always having sort of one leader and everybody else as a follower. So rotating chairs is a really good idea. Again, sort of from personal experience of living through this in an organization, some additional things I would add there is we don't want, it can be a very psychologically, scary thing to chair a meeting, and particularly if you don't have a hierarchical or a position of power within an organization. And so you want to be really explicit about that. So there's different things that you can do. You can provide training on leading meetings prior to asking anybody to do that. And also having co-chairs can be a really nice way to do that. So you would have somebody who's experienced with leading meetings be a co-chair with somebody who has less experience, and then those two people can work together, and that can be a much safer way for somebody who has less experience. But just, I think, again, it's thinking about all the principles and putting them together. So we don't just want to, and broad and inclusive invite. So at the end of a meeting saying, okay, who wants to chair the next meeting? and you're met with silence, and they say, okay, I guess nobody, so I'll do it. Right? That wasn't a broader inclusive invitation. It wasn't a real invitation. It wasn't a real invitation at all. And so how do we create conditions, if we want to have chairs or co-chairs, how do we create conditions such that it's safe and empowering for somebody to do that? And so there's a lot of work needs to be done around that. It will pay dividends, but you can't just expect to walk into your workplace tomorrow, and if you haven't had rotating chairs or you haven't had co-chairs, that it's going to happen just because you ask. Other things I would add briefly is, simple things, but they're aligned with this, predictability, regulation. We want to have water for people if at all possible, just, food if you can, but water for people at meetings. Absolutely, your meeting should have an opening and a closing. I'm going to use the word ritual. A ritual can be as simple as, and that's the end of the meeting and goodbye everybody, but there should be predictability around opening and closing. Spending some time as well talking about how agreements are reached in meetings. So I've certainly been at many meetings where there's some version of, okay, hearing no objections, we'll move on. Okay. Again, that's really not a trauma-informed way to make decisions. There may be no objections because of the power differentials within a meeting, and it does not feel safe to necessarily have an objection. Okay, and so how do we get input from everybody in a way that people genuinely feel included and genuinely feel that it's safe to say what they want to say, or to give that in another way other than verbally saying, and that can take a long time. And are decisions reached by, is it consensus? Is it majority? Is it everybody has input but a leader decides? And that may be entirely appropriate, but it is what's important is the transparency around that. Okay, so say something like a budget decision. It is entirely appropriate, right, for CEO to say, I want to hear everybody's input on this, but I do want you to know we won't be reaching this decision by a vote. I will, it's on me to make the final decision, but I want everybody's input. That's much more aligned with trauma-informed principles. It's much more honest than, oh, let's see what everybody wants to do with the budget. But you really don't, but there's no honesty about who has the decision-making power. Because for a couple of years now, many of us have been meeting more and more virtually, more and more like this, and for a very particular reason, for the fact that we're going through a pandemic and a worldwide and a group trauma and sort of constant stress and stressors. What might be some special considerations there? So again, just briefly, and there'll be some more resources on this too. Briefly, it is incumbent on us to truly acknowledge the stress and the stressors. So to be explicit and upfront about that, to name it, and to really think about in any and including online, in any of the opening of meetings and the closing, that we do pay attention to regulation, and to doing that, particularly when people get together physically. They can co-regulate, right? You get together in a meeting room, you tend to kind of sit by your buddy, and again, depending on relationships in the workplace, but maybe somebody's getting upset, you might be able to pat or rub that person's back, or just be there beside them. And so we don't have that in a virtual setting. And so paying attention to emotional and body physical regulation within virtual meetings is important, and being explicit about that. As well as, because I've seen more and more of this as well in virtual meetings, it can be wonderful to do yoga stretches and group breathing and these these regulation practices together. But it's also very important that people don't practice outside of their scope of practice, or we don't have, people who watched one YouTube video suddenly, saying that they're Reiki healers or, yogi masters or things like that. So I'm always kind of a little cautious around there. So do have a thought out plan for webcam use, and you want to communicate that plan and that rationale. So here, I'm not talking about rules, but when there's meetings happening virtually, you know, what are the expectations for having or not having your webcam on, and let people know. I often in the meetings that I have, I really like people to have their webcams on. And if that's why, tell people why that is. But I think there should, you know, it can't be this hard and fast rule that it needs to be on, because there may be safety reasons people can't have it on. But I've also found if you really invite people to have it on and you tell them why it's important, people will turn them on. If you don't need them on, then be like, I don't need you to have your webcam on. It's easier not to. All right, and we're getting to time. So other things for virtual meetings, strategize on including and inviting all participants while keeping the principle of safety in mind. And so, yeah, we want to think about webcams. We want to think about people who might have lots of other distractions in the home. We want to think about having closed captioning, other things there, special attention to regulation. And just remembering virtual meetings are difficult. Even 2 years into it, it's tough. Growth and change, being future oriented, is a trauma-informed value, and so we can kind of embrace that and say, yeah, this is tough, but we're learning and growing together. Do include, if you're virtual meetings, somebody's got to really work on having visual prompts and things like that, so it's not all boring and it's not all PowerPoint. So these resources will follow this webinar and guide you to help you putting some of these principles into practice then, and some action ideas. We'll have a guide to virtual meetings from Trauma Informed Oregon. I will link you to the On Being project, which has a lot of resources, including some great podcasts as well. Very aligned with trauma informed principles, really about intentional conversations. The Conscious Leadership Group as well has a meeting agenda that may be very helpful and has quite a business perspective. Echo Training and Parenting have some really beautiful and well aligned trauma informed principle guidelines. There's a lovely book by a woman called Priya Parker on the art of gathering. It's a little bit more of the background stuff about thinking about why do we come together? Why is it important? And just that art of inviting people into a space and recognizing people's full humanity is just a gorgeous book. And thinking about sort of group rules versus group agreements and ways we can be together. Send you a PDF as well from the First Alaskans Institute, which has some great thoughts there on agreements for dialogues or groups as they come together. That just shows you some of those, and we'll end then with the closing thought, because this certainly is marathon work to sort of shift up the way meetings are done, but pays huge dividends. So if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Eliza. Because I wasn't able to take questions because we couldn't go live because the power went out here in Bethel, where I am, last week. If you do have specific questions, my email and phone number are there, so feel free to get in touch. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Addie, for all of that great information. And like Addie said, the resources will come with the recording. So if you're watching this, you will have access to all of those resources. And then just a reminder that our next trauma-informed webinar in ACT's series on self-care and community care, getting the balance right, will be on Thursday, January 13, from 12 to 1 p.m. And we'll be sending out an email with details to register for that very soon. So we hope to see you all live then.